Okay. Well, I'd like now to introduce Cecilia Lagann, who comes from the University of Caen in Normandy. And I saw her on a previous event, or Zoom event, when she talked about one of her discoveries. And she's done a PhD thesis, which is quite remarkable because it covers the whole period from 500 to 1300, and it looks at medieval furniture and furnishings in that period, and it really examines an amazing range of materials. And I'm very glad to say that there's good prospect of this book being published as a book by CRAHAM University Press. She's now working, she was working in the University of Pau, in the south of France, now back to the research centre in Caen. So she's going to talk about two very famous pieces of medieval furniture at Aubazine and Bayeux. And many people would have probably visited Bayeux, the cathedral there. I've never seen the Aubazine cupboards, but they're very famous, and I think I very much look forward to this talk. They're pieces of furniture which have been referred to in English by Penelope Eames in her book on medieval furniture. So I think for an English-speaking readership, they're not so well known. So glad.
Okay, well, thank you, Chris, and thank you very much to the Regional Furniture Society for accepting my proposal for talking today. So as Chris said, and as the title says, I'm going to talk about the evolution and transformation of furniture in its architectural environment, and through the examples of the Armoires of Bayeux and of Aubazine. Since medieval furniture became a subject of interest to researchers in the 19th century, its study has been linked to architecture, especially the architectural styles their decorative elements could display. Furniture description borrowed a lot of words from the architectural world in characterization. And after all, the first researchers on medieval furniture were usually architects themselves. That's certainly the case with Eugène Viollet-le-Duc, which is the most famous in France. But it's the same with César Daly or Pierre Gélis-Didot, who all produced very important works on medieval furniture during the 19th century. They're not all works that have stood very well the test of time, but there were still very important works in the 19th century, and they were all architects. This specific approach has led to the establishment of certain ground rules concerning medieval furniture that have remained unchallenged for a long time. One of those unquestioned ideas is that medieval storage furniture in particular had to be conceived according to the architectural style of the time. For example, an armoire or a chest that would display barrel arches and simple columns would be automatically described as Romanesque, and thus could only have been made between the 11th and the 13th century. Anything with pointed arches was decidedly Gothic, and thus especially made between the 13th and the 15th century. And anything that had no decorative elements, plain furniture, well, they would most definitely date back to those dreaded times when there was no decorative style and were considered very ancient. That's the case, for example, with this chest that would have been dated sometimes before the 11th century and thought very ancient, not very interesting. Of course, you see me coming from a mile away. That's not that's not something that has to be done. That's a bit of a caricature, but that's something that's been done, and it's quite it's a problem because it's not true. For these chests, for example, they look quite the same. Technically, they're exactly the same, but they do not date from the same period at all. The first one on the left is from the late 12th century. The one in the middle is from the late 13th century, and the one on the right is from the very, very late 14th century. So here we have 2 centuries apart, but exactly the same kind of furniture. So only taking decorative elements to date is something that is not a good thing to do. I can take another example, which I will develop a bit more after. But we have here the Armoire of Obazin. I will present it in more details in a little bit. But this armoire has been dated from the late 12th century or very early 13th century for the only reason that the sides has barrel arches and columns that resemble the church. And the Fleur De Lis motif as well of the metalwork, of the ironwork here, is very similar to what is found in the church. And the church was consecrated in 1176. So the armoire, it was thought, was automatically made at the same time, just because it looks like the church it's in. Another preconceived idea that dates back to those first researchers of the 19th century is that medieval furniture that survived through time did so without any modification. All elements of those pieces of furniture could only date back to one specific period, the period of construction of the furniture. The questions of evolution or modification of a piece of furniture were never really asked. I'm going to take another example, the Armoire of Bayeux, which also I'm going to present in more details in a little while. This magnificent, huge armoire has one door that is painted. That's the one on the left here. And this painted door has been almost the sole focus of all studies that has been made in the 19th century and sometimes even well into the 20th century. And the rest of the armoire has almost never been really worked on, really studied before. So now you see me coming, of course. This is not a serious way to study furniture. Furniture cannot only be studied for its decorative elements and only in regards to architectural styles. There has to be other ways. The dialogue, especially between architectural environment and furniture, must be scrutinized in a much more elaborate way. It must be much deeper. Buildings archaeology is now a well-established science, one that elaborates on evolutions and modifications of structures through time and their integration into a wider environment, whether it's urban or natural or whatever. And the study of furniture must have the same approach. A piece of furniture, especially those larger pieces that are armoires and cupboards and even chests sometimes, they're actually a mini building. So it has to be done, and we have to study them for their structure, but as well for their relation to the environment, whatever they are. So, like I said, this is especially the case with those larger pieces of furniture that are armoires. The name armoire is a French name that refers to a freestanding closed structure used to store things. That's the general definition. And the word was originally used to designate a storing facility for weapons. That's from the Latin armarium. That then evolved into its modern meaning for storing document, clothes, linens, artifacts, whatever. I think in English, I'm not sure it's really used in English today. I found it in a lot of dictionaries and study books that study furniture. I'm not quite sure it's actually used in the everyday word, but I think it could be separated from a wardrobe that's especially for clothes, or maybe a cupboard that should be integrated into the architecture. I'm not sure, but I'm going to talk about an armoires, and this is generally what I'm going to be talking about. Studying medieval armoires is not really easy because there aren't that many left, actually, even though they're pretty big, but there aren't that many left in Europe. And so it's always quite an adventure to study armoires, and also because none of them look alike. Like the few that exist, the few dozens that exist, are very dissimilar from one another. So it's quite hard to make comparisons. And it's even more the case, especially the case in France, where the French Revolution made sure not to leave too many artifacts for us researchers to feel too comfortable. So we have to be a bit careful. There are, however, two very exceptional armoires and magnificent that are at the same time very famous, but not very well known, because studies about them have mostly been quite superfluous, and have had the opportunity during my thesis to study them more precisely and from a more technical point of view especially, but a lot remains to be done. So I'm talking, of course, of the armoires of the title, and which I've already mentioned, the armoires of Bayeux and Aubazine, which we're going to see a bit more deeply now. So first of all, unlike what the title announced, I'm first going to talk about the Armoire of Obazine. Aubazine is a very small town. It's a village, actually, in the Limousin region. So that's the center of France. And it's in the Corrèze department, to be very precise. And Aubazine is home to 12th century Benedictine monastery that is especially famous because Coco Chanel spent her teenage years over there in the orphanage. That monastery is equipped with a church dedicated to Saint-Etienne, Saint Stephen, and in the church there is an armoire that is made of oak, and that is supposedly, according to tradition, especially in France, the oldest still standing piece of furniture in France, sometimes even in Europe, just to be very modest about it. It's probably not the case, and I'm going to explain why it's not, and we'll see that in a little bit. The armoire was discovered or studied for the first time, at least, by Eugène Viollet-le-Duc during the 19th century. And it was then protected with a Monument Historique classification in 1891. And it has since been the subject of a series of superfluous studies and a few restoration campaigns. So today it doesn't contain anything. Officially, it doesn't contain anything, but if you go there, there's actually the Christmas scene that's stored in there, actually. The armoire, as you can see, is a sturdy construction. It's 2.32 meter high. It's made of 6 uprights. Oh, the PowerPoint is not working anymore. Oh, sorry, I forgot something. The armoire, like I said earlier, the armoire is usually traditionally dated to the end of the 12th century or the beginning of the 13th century, primarily because it looks like the church, especially the barrel arches and columns that I mentioned earlier, which are quite similar to the ones on the bell tower, as well as the cloisters. And the Fleur De Lis motif on the ironwork, on the straps, on the iron straps here from the hinges, are very similar as the one that we can find on the sacristy cupboards, as well as the baptismal font cupboards. And that alone, the fact that it's Romanesque and those similarities made people assume that it was built exactly at the same time as the church, which is at the end of the 12th century. Spoiler alert, it's probably not. So, like I said, the armoire is a sturdy construction. It is 2.32 meters high. It is made of 6 solid uprights, 3 in the front and 3 in the back. They are around 30 centimeters wide and 10 centimeters thick, to which are assembled a series of rectangular boards that form the back of the armoire as well as the sides. The front is made of 2 rectangular boards at the bottom, upon which are placed the arch doors, which are topped by 2 more boards of fitted shape. The wooden boards and pillars are assembled through a variety of dowel, tongue, and grooves, which are not here, never mind. The doors are each articulated with a couple of hinges for launch with straps stylized into Fleur De Lis motif. A bolt with an animal head handle that you can discern here is, the bolt as well as a lock shuts each door. The summit is composed of an assemblage of boards and an extruding molding that is here, that you can see here. As for decorative elements, we already saw a few of them, and they're not very numerous. So there are the barrel arches of the sides, which are completed by a series of simple columns. There is the summit molding, as well as the top part of the sideboards, which are decorated with a frieze, a triangular frieze that is painted red. There is a highlight in red paint of the arches as well. And then there are the metallic elements, which are stylized, so into a fleur de lis and into a double pear shape in the middle as well. So it's not a lot of decorative elements, but it's there. There used to be a series of nails as well on the facade. You can see on the drawing the little dots that are on the facade as well. You can see it on the photograph. There were probably decorative nails, and they were removed at some time. We don't know where exactly. They already weren't there in the 19th century, but we don't know exactly when they were removed. Inside the armoire, there are 4 levels of shelves, which are divided vertically. Levels 1 to 3 from top to bottom are made of long boards that are slid into grooves in the uprights inside the pillars. Level 4 on the bottom, at the bottom of the armoire, is composed of 7 or 8 small boards. Some of them are missing today, and it's only accessible if level 3, the level 3 shelf, is lifted. And the boards used for that 3rd level seem a bit more recent and were probably replaced at some point, though we don't know when exactly. So this is for the presentation of the armoire. As far as technical elements are concerned, the wooden structure is not a good indication as far as dating is concerned. There are no comparable armoire existing in Europe, not in its entirety, not that I know of as well. So if you do know one like that, please tell me, but I don't think it exists in Europe. The dowel, tongue, and groove type of joining technique is something that is very well known during the Middle Ages, but also before and after. So again, this is not a good dating element, not a good comparison for dating furniture, especially in the Middle Ages. It's very difficult. So to be able to pinpoint a bit more the dating date, we have to look at the specifics of the armoire. The first thing that we can have a look at is the extruding molding that exists on other elements, other furniture, and especially other armoires. The first example is the armoire, one of the armoires of Noyon in the north of France. and which has quite a similar type of extruding molding. It dates back from the 13th century, between 1216 and 1240. It's been dendrodated. There is another example in Westminster that's been dendrodated between 1377 and 1393. And then there's the one in Malines in Belgium that is a lot later, that is from the end of the 15th century. And that for once is actually dated from a document. There is a financial document attesting of the buying of the armoire in 1475 or 1476. So the extruding molding is found on furniture from the 12th to the 15th century. So once again, it's not very precise. What we can look at is the general structure, the shape and the way it's made, and it's actually very close to a type of chest that I call chests with uprights that turn into legs. So it's quite a mouthful, I'm sorry, I'm working on it, but at least it's quite clear. There are uprights, just like on the armoire, there are several uprights, 4 or 6 when the chests are very long. And these uprights are higher, longer than the boards that makes the body of the chest. So it elevates the chest, it doesn't lie on the ground. And so there are legs. This type of chest is the most well-preserved type of chest from the Middle Ages. There are hundreds of them, especially in Germany, but also in England, and there are a few in France. There are also many in Switzerland and in many places. This type of chest is also has a very long lifespan. We find in collections, in museums or in churches, they are dated from the 12th to the 16th century, but we also found traces in archaeology in France of that same type of chest from the 9th century. So it's actually a lot older, even though the uprights tend to be a bit smaller and thinner, actually. The general structure of the armoire is not helpful either, because it's actually found in a very wide chronology. If we look a bit more precisely at the decorative elements this time, the barrel arches is found on a few of those chests, especially on chests from the collection of the Musée du Valère in Sion in Switzerland. And there are at least these three chests that are quite similar in their construction, as well as in this decorative elements. And they are basically from the late 12th to the 13th century, which is interesting. The one that is most interesting is this MV82 chest that's dated from 1270 by dendrochronology. And what's interesting is that the barrel arches are made exactly the same way as on the armoire, which is they are not sculpted directly on the chest, but they were made on another piece of wood that was then applied on the chest and doweled into it. And that's exactly what's happening on the armoire as well. So that's an interesting comparison, and it dates from 1270. So it's already the late 13th century, and we're a bit further from the late 12th or early 13th century. But that's one point of comparison. It's an interesting one, but that's only one. Okay, so what about the metallic elements now? Well, the metallic elements are a bit more precise, actually, because we can find them in archaeological context. So we have more points of comparison. The bolt, the lock plate, as well as the lock mechanism and the key are all very similar to artifacts found in archaeological context of the late 13th century to the late 14th century. That's when we find most of those types of elements, including these bolts with an animal head handle. So that's very interesting, as well as a lock plate that's been decorative with inserted metallic elements. What's interesting as well is that we can find exactly the same kind of metallic artifacts from lock plate, bolt and key from the Abbey of Maillezais in Vendée from a context of the late 14th century. That's a bit more precise, and that's quite interesting. But what about the Fleur De Lis motif, I hear you ask? Well, that Fleur De Lis motif, which is not at all a French royal element, it's very well known from a lot of other things, even if the French kings adopted it in the 12th century. But here, that has nothing to do with that. And the problem is it's very, very, very well known and very often found on furniture from the 12th century to the 15th century at least. And we can find it in archaeological context on other pieces of furniture. We find it as well on iconography. It's very, very well known and it's everywhere. So it's not very helpful either. It's there, it's medieval. What we can say so far is that it's definitely medieval. So if I summarize everything, legend has it that the armoire was built during the late 12th century or early 13th century. But comparative analysis with other pieces of furniture and with artifacts from the archaeological context points to a wider chronology that could go between the 12th century to the 15th century with a bigger probability for the late 13th to the late 14th century. So that's just looking at the armoire. But I said earlier that the armoire looks like the building. So what about that? It does resemble the church. We saw the pictures earlier. But actually the question is, does the armoire look like the church, or does the church look like the armoire? Because it could be the other way around. So the answer, of course, is not straight at all, and it could be a bit of both. Concerning the barrel arches motif, here it's quite sure that it's the armoire that actually looks like the church, because the church was definitely made at the end of the 12th century, especially the bell tower and the cloisters. They were there when the church was finished at the end of the 12th century. So the barrel arches of the armoire were most probably made to look like the church. So that's all right. If we look at the Fleur De Lis motif, that's actually a bit more complicated here. There we go. Where was I? Okay, yeah. The metallic fittings of the armoire look to be the original one. What's complicated when we look at metallic fittings on furniture is that they could have been replaced at any time, actually, except that those replacements leave traces. We can see when a metallic element has been pulled out. And that's actually the case here. You can see that the end of the Fleur De Lis motif has been pulled out consistently on all the Fleur De Lis. That's probably something that has to do with the French Revolution. We're not sure 100%, but that's the most likely hypothesis. But even if this bit here has been tooled out, the rest is from the armoire. Like it's probably never been replaced, or if it's been replaced, it's been replaced with the exact same shape. So on the armoire, they are the original, but on the sacristy cupboards, which have been linked to the armoire a lot, they used to be in the shape of a Fleur De Lis, but they were probably not on the original doors, because here we can see that they've been pulled out, especially on the lower bands. We can see that the ironwork was a bit bigger, used to be a bit bigger and a bit squarer. We can see on the lower rights here that the iron straps were a bit squarer, and there were more and bigger nails. We can see the traces as well. So here, maybe the ironwork of the cupboards were changed at some point for whatever reason, and maybe they were changed and made to look like the armoire that was not far. I have no proof whatsoever of that, because to prove that, we would have to prove the date of the metal, and that's not easy to do. And what we could do is to dendrodate the cupboards as well as the armoire. That would be very interesting, but it's not done yet, and I'll tell you why in a little while. So here, maybe the cupboards were made to look like the armoire that was already there. What about the baptismal font cupboard? Here, it doesn't seem like the metalwork have been pulled out or changed. So they look to be original as well. But the plot thickens, actually, because this baptismal font cupboard is on a wall that actually was built in the 18th century. Because, okay, sorry, I had details here. The baptismal fonts, they are on this western gate, next to the western gate of the church. They're actually somewhere behind the buttress on the left. And that wall was actually built in 1731, because at the early 18th century, they decided that the church was actually too big, so they destroyed one wall, and then they advanced it, pulled it forward, and then they rebuilt the wall. And that cupboard is behind that wall that was built in the 18th century. But it could be that the doors especially, the stonework as well, but the doors especially, were actually taken from something that existed before. It's actually very possible, because the doors look quite battered, so they look a bit older than just a couple of 100 years, 300 years now. So what I want to say with all that is that there is definitely a research for coherence and cohesion with the decorative elements. The armoire definitely looks like the church, but it's very difficult to establish a proper relative dating of all those elements. Which came first? Did the armoire came first, or did the cupboards came first, especially? And we don't really know that. To know that, we would have to do a dendrochronology analysis of all those elements, but it's a bit difficult. And I'm trying to do it, and I will. I have a collective research project that is ready, with specialists of the metalwork, with specialists of dendrochronology, and other specialists. And as soon as I have a tenured job and I can secure a funding scheme, I will try to do that. But I wouldn't hold my breath if I were you, because jobs and funding schemes are very scarce, of course. But I'm going to try to make that happen. So here we have an armoire that is quite complex, and that is probably not dated from the late 12th century or early 13th century, but probably a bit later. But that has a very strong relation with its environment regarding to decorative style. Now, we're going to see another example, which is a bit different, and which is the Armoire of Bayeux. You probably know Bayeux a bit more than you know Aubazine, of course. It's a bit better known to the English. It was during the Middle Ages one of the biggest cities of Normandy, and it was and it is still today where the famous tapestry still is curated and conserved. In the Cathedral Notre Dame, on the first floor of the Treasury Chapel, on the south side of the church, lies a very big and very magnificent armoire. This armoire is known from the 15th century document that refers to the treasury coffer. It's probably, we're not sure 100%, but it could definitely be this armoire. It was then studied in 1852 by César Daly, who drew it, and probably drew it quite faithfully. It's a very important and interesting drawing, this one. The armoire was then classified with the Monument Historique label in 1898, and it has since been studied a few times, including by Eugène Viollet-le-Duc, who made another drawing, even though Eugène Viollet-le-Duc never saw the armoire, and so he made a drawing of an armoire that actually never existed, and which is very dangerous in terms of scientific accuracy, of course. The armoire is usually dated from the early 13th century, around 1230, but more generally the first half of the 13th century, for once again, the only reason that the chapel in which it is was built during the first half of the 13th century. So it's quite the same idea than with Aubazine. As you can see, this armoire is enormous. It's really big. It's 3 meters high, including the pinnacles. It's 5.20 meters long, and it's only 88 centimeters wide. The general structure is quite simple. It's made of a frame of uprights and sleepers that were assembled with dowelled tenon and mortise joints. There are 2 rows of doors set in rabbet cuts in the frame and articulated each with a pair of hinges prolonged with straps, iron straps. The back, the sides and the bottom are composed of a multitude of rectangular boards unevenly cut, assembled with a V-shaped tongue and groove joints. At least at the front, 5 legs support the structure, and at the back, the structure actually lies on the stone bench that runs around the room. At the top, there are 3 pinnacles. The 2 at the ends are almost identical, and the one in the middle is a bit different than the other 2. Concerning decorative elements, we can see that it's a bit more decorated than and differently than the Armoire of Obazin. The frame, the legs, and the pinnacles are painted with a vegetal motif of half palmettes distributed on each side of the wavy stem, painted white on a black background with red borders. And the external right upright shows a slightly different motif of palmettes, but it's in a very similar style. Today, today 7 pair of doors are visible, but there actually used to be an additional one, as the pair of doors on the left side was cut off when the access of the chapel was modified in 1756, and the modern door was installed. So the door that you can see open on the left here actually didn't exist until the middle of the 18th century. And so there used to be another pair of doors here that were simply cut off and removed when that door was installed. And that's a very important first element that has to be considered when studying this armoire. It's not what it used to look like. It used to look like a work of precise symmetry. There used to be 8 pair of doors on 2 rows that opened face to face with 5 legs evenly distributed this time and aligned with the uprights, because the two legs on the left here have actually been moved to better balance the new distribution. And the armoire actually fitted the whole wall, divided in the middle by the semi-column that we can see on the back here. And it was cut. We can see it on the drawing that I made here. There is an angle that was made to accommodate that semi-column. So we have 2 very important information. First of all, the armoire used to be precisely made to fit the room, including its length, the height of the legs, because it has to fit the height of the bench, of the stone bench, as well as the back of the armoire that gets around the semi-column and the wall. And unlike the Armoire of Obazin, this is not about style here. It's just about dimension and fitting in the room, physically fitting in the room. The second important information is that the opening of a new chapel door and the cutting out of the left end pair of doors disrupted that symmetrical balance with a now odd number of doors in a row and at least two of the legs that were moved to the right and one of the main uprights entirely removed, the uprights that was on the left here, or was just discarded. So what used to be a perfectly balanced and adapted to the room then got unbalanced by the new adaptation to the access to the room. So we have here a good example of evolution, modification, and adaptation to the architectural environment from the get-go. If we look more closely, we can see more detail emerge, and we can see that the armoire has actually been modified a lot. First of all, we're going to have a look at the doors. The 7 doors on the upper row, as well as the 2 doors on the right side of the lower row, have the same structure. Each is made of 3 boards assembled with wooden pins, as well as nail bars on the inside and iron fittings on the outside. Each door is articulated by a pair of hinges with straps ending in the Fleur De Lis motif. On the right door of each pair were a lock, so you can see here, there is the lock with a bolt that overlap the upright and that goes onto the other door so that the left door of the pair would also be locked with only one bolt, sorry. These 9 doors, the 7 on the upper row and the 2 on the right lower row, are probably the original doors of the armoire. They all have the same structure, they have the same metallic artifacts. And even though most of the locks have actually been changed, they've been added in the 19th century, everything is still quite homogeneous. The lock, we have a detail here as well, sorry, I forgot. So that's the general structure of the pairs of doors that open face to face. The left door no, that's not what I wanted to say. The bolts, most of the bolts, even if the locks are, most of them not original, most of the bolts are, and they are consistent, once again, with archaeological artifacts from the 14th century. They have the same shape, and we can see here the crisscross engraving that used to be inlaid with metallic threads, and they are very consistent with 14th century artifacts. The lock on the first door, so the upper left door here, that's the image you have on the left here, seem to be original. Like the lock doesn't seem to have been removed or changed, and it's consistent with late 13th or 14th century lock mechanisms and plates. So it's a good element of dating for this thing. The other locks, like I said, are from the modern period and were installed after the 19th century, because we can see from César Daly's drawing that the locks are absent, but are today present. So between 1852 and today, they were added, and they're from the modern period, probably the 18th century. The green paint that we see on most of the doors is less preserved, and it might be a later addition because it's also found on the other doors, but we'll see more details on that later. The 5 other doors of the bottom are more challenging. The 3 middle doors have the same structure. They only have 2 boards instead of 3 from the other doors that I've just described. And 2 of them have faint traces of figured scenes painted on a red background that were covered with the same green background, same green paint that we see on the other ones. That's why I think the green paint is a bit later. The 3rd door only shows very faint traces of the green paint, but it seems to have been scrubbed very much. That door here seems to have been scrubbed a lot more. But this door is a bit more interesting for other reasons. The first one is that the orientation of the door, of the opening of the door, has been changed. It's been reversed. It used to open from left to right, but now it opens from the right. And we can see here that the iron work has been cut off, then there was another one added here. So that's the first thing. It opens on the wrong side compared to the other doors. The other thing that is interesting on this door is that we can clearly see that iron straps were removed. We can see the trace here, and then they were added. So there was another one up there, and then there is a bit here that was also removed and added. And then there was a lock that's been removed, and then a bit of wood has been put inside to close the gap. So clearly this door has been modified a lot. And on top of that, those three doors inside have a green, a much greener, a bright green coat of paint that is absent of all the other doors. And there are inside also traces of removed hinges and removed metal straps. So they were clearly probably added from another piece of furniture. They were not from the original cupboard, armoire. They were probably taken from somewhere else and put there, but they were probably taken from the same piece of furniture because they have very similar elements. Now, the last two doors. These last two doors are difficult, especially the second to the one on the right. This one has the same three-board structure as the original doors. It has the same external green coat of paint. The inside is bare without any traces of pulled out iron fittings. So it looks like it could be also an original door. The problem is it's bigger actually than the other doors because there is no upright dividing those doors here. If the symmetry was really properly respected, there should be an upright here, but it doesn't exist. But it doesn't look like it used to exist and it doesn't exist anymore. It looks like it never existed actually. So it's very intriguing. I don't know why there is here a space where there is no upright. There should be one, and it's very intriguing. So this door is a bit complicated because it looks like it's an original one, but not totally. And it's weird. It's intriguing. I don't have the answer. Now, the last one. I'm almost done. I know my time is up, but I'm very nearly done. That's the painted door, the most famous door of it. Well, the most famous door, once again, you might have gathered my hints were not so subtle. It's most likely not from the original armoire. It was probably taken once again from another piece of furniture and added there. Was it from the same furniture as the other three doors? I don't know. Was it at the same time? I don't know, maybe. But I don't have the answers. So just briefly here, there are two scenes on two levels. On the upper level, God is figure in majesty holding the globe and surrounded by four angels, two holding a censer and two presenting him with a soul. And on the bottom half, there are four monks lifting a reliquary on their shoulder. And once again, on this door, we have traces of removed iron straps that are very clearly, we can see them very clearly. The inside is bare though, so that's why I don't think it was taken from the same piece of furniture as the other three that had a vibrant green coat of paint inside. So to summarize, this armoire was made specifically to fit the room. It was altered when the room itself was modified. It evolved with the architecture. It evolved as well with modern technology, because I didn't really talk about it, but when electricity was installed in the room, wires were put behind the armoire. And so a couple of boards were removed to allow that installation in the 70s. But the rest of the armoire also evolved through time, except for one. None of the locks are original. Some of the bolts as well may have been changed at some point, we're not quite sure. Some of the doors were removed. Some of the doors had their way of opening reversed, and so on and so on. So, and there's also the question of the green paint. When was it? I think it was added at some point. When was that? I don't know. Concerning the date of construction, it's simpler and a bit more complicated than for Aubazine. The early 13th century dating is probably not consistent, not a good one. Though we know the chapel was built around 1230 or during the first half of the 13th century. That's a terminus postquem that is very interesting. But we have another one, which is, so I've talked about that, the lock and bolt that are late 13th century or 14th century. The church of Noyon used to have another armoire that was destroyed during World War I, and that has a very similar structure, and that is usually dated of the 14th century, which is interesting. And most of all, the tilings of the chapel go around the armoire. They were installed after the armoire, and the style of the tiles is consistent with a 14th century installation. So what we can say is that it was built after the first half of the 13th century and probably sometime during the 14th century. But once again, what would be really interesting would be a dendrochronology analysis of several of the doors of the structure, as well as the very fine analysis of the paintings as well, because I'm definitely not specialist of that, of styles, but of pigments and so on. So that's also, this armoire would be part of the big project I talked about earlier that I would really like to set aside, to set forward rather. So what we have are big pieces of furniture that were definitely made in relation to the architectural environment, whether it's according to decorative style or because of the installation to fit the room and so on. As a conclusion, I'm going to show you very quickly something that we can date a lot better. You have in the north of England, inside York Minster, the Zouch chapel, which was equipped of a series of cupboards. They were dendrodated of around 1400, so that's done. There were a lot of evolution through time, but the first date is the 1400. This, just next to the chapel, the door that you can see on the left here, leads to a sacristy that is still used today. In that sacristy, we have a freestanding armoire that is in exactly the same kind of style, including the molding, the crenelled molding here, crenellated molding, as well as the iron straps that are made with an arrow and little flowers. We don't have the date precise of this armoire, but it's probably during the 15th century as well. And more importantly, we have the very modern cupboards that were made during the 20th century, and they were made to match the exact same style. So we have there again the crenellated molding on the top, as well as the iron fittings that are the same, but they are 20th century. So we definitely have a research for harmony and for cohesion made for these wider elements of furniture. And I thank you for your attention, and please forgive me for going over time.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Cecile. That's been a very wide-ranging talk, and I think you've demonstrated how the relating woodwork to stonework and to ironwork has been very, very fertile. Also, you've ended with a plan of action of research, which we very much hope you'll be able to carry forward, because obviously you're on top of all this material and you're very well established in what's been done before. So we're hoping that this will carry forward. Right, we've got about 5 minutes for questions. So if we go back to the questions that have been raised, very few actually, people have been absorbed in what you've been speaking. There's a question from Johan van Kettenelbogen. Has the end panel been reused? I think you may have covered that.
Which one, sorry?
The end panel.
No, I don't know. We have no traces of it. So far, it hasn't been stored anywhere. I haven't seen it anywhere else in the church. Maybe it's something in a storage facility, but I haven't seen it, and I need to do more work on maybe paperwork to check if there's any trace of it, but I don't think so. Okay,
we've got a question from Jeremy Rycroft. Was the Bayeux chest painted as with the Noyon chest? Sorry, the Bayeux chest is painted as with the Noyon chest. Is it likely that the Aubazine cupboard was painted?
No, not entirely. There are traces of red paint on the sides, but it's very unlikely that there was any more elements painted. It was definitely not painted everywhere. I've seen restitution in, I think it's in Dover, where there is a sort of copy of that armoire that has been made to fit Henry II context, actually, which is like an heresy, but never mind. And it's been painted green and blue and red everywhere. But no, I really don't think so. And there are chests that have been preserved as well. And all of them, they have faint traces of paint, like the few of the engraved motifs are sometimes painted, but not the whole of it. So I don't think there was, maybe a bit more, but not that much more.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any more questions? There are a lot of comments about how much people have appreciated your paper. So I think that's a good moment to move on. So thank you again. So we'll move on now to Nick Humphrey's paper.